And a very good morning to everybody. Welcome, welcome. It's so lovely to have you with us, part of the IAB Insight series for 2025. My name is Danilo Acquisto. I get to be your wonderful host for today. Every month I get the huge privilege to facilitate discussions with some of our industry leaders as you and I learn together here with the Insight series. A fascinating couple of episodes we've had so far as we've started 2025. And I really appreciate all of your attention and registration throughout the sort of short time frames we've had to set up each of our webinars for this month particularly. I see so many familiar faces in the attendee list today, as well as some new faces who haven't yet been around at the Insights before. So if you're new here, welcome. It's wonderful to have you. The IAB, as a regulatory body, has decided to put resources into every month, taking some of the insights from our biggest councils that are having conversations about what matters most to our industry every single month, right to your laptop, cell phone, or wherever you are joining us from today, just to make sure that we can, as an industry, move the body forward. So we really appreciate your time today. These sessions are always recorded, and to the IAB members, the full recording and insights are hosted on the portal, as well as some of the insights will be sort of drafted into press releases and articles and distributed throughout the sort of public media as well too. So if you're not an IAB member, I'm sure some of these insights will make its way into the social media platforms like LinkedIn and Instagram, but you're also welcome to obviously take as many notes as you'd like from our session today. As I mentioned, my name is Danilo, and I'm here to make sure that everything runs nice and smoothly today. So just for your own interest, at the bottom of your screen, you've got really three options. The one is our chat, which is a nice open space for you to be able to just to talk amongst yourselves, share some insights, make some commentary on the content as we're going through it today. There's also a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. That Q&A box is a very strict environment used only for the Q&A. So we won't be taking questions from the chat at all. So please do make sure that if you have a question for our panelists or a discussion you want us to have in our Q&A section towards the end today, please do move that question over to the Q&A box. And we'll make sure that your questions get answered as a priority for our speakers that are here today. And there's also a third little one, and I'm going to use it as well too. It's called React at the bottom of your screen down there. You'll see little opportunities to use some emojis on your screen. So if there's something happening that you wanted to be able to react to, you're welcome to obviously use that React function as well too on Zoom. So in terms of today, what are we covering? What did you register for? Today, we're diving into a topic that's really reshaping our entire industry, and it's been the topic of conversation across media and marketing. It's probably bleeding out of your ears currently and your eyeballs. Every TikTok account you see, every website that you follow, every newsletter you receive is covering AI. And we obviously are needing to try and find some ways to localize and understand what our approach is as an industry in South Africa. And so we're going to be exploring that buzzword of the year, AI. But for 2025, and particularly for this Actionable Insight series, our theme is trust, transparency, and the next era of digital marketing. And this session, putting together, we've had it put together by a new council and a committee at the IAB. It's called the IAB Content Marketing and Branded Entertainment Council. They're focusing specifically on the things that we need to consider before we use AI. It's a reality check for marketers and a reality check for creatives as well. And so you would have seen slightly more cheeky email marketing going out as well too, saying to before you ask me about AI, is the sort of title of the session today. So it's not about shiny new toys. We'll be tackling the big question. How do we use AI ethically in our own content? How do we ensure we're being upfront with our audiences about when and how AI is involved? We will touch on topics from data privacy to crucial human connection in our storytelling world that is so desperately needed in digital and social media content today. And we really do encourage you to engage the conversation. This is not a one-way street. We would love for you to engage the chat today. So please do use that Q&A section, ask your hard questions. No question is silly, and there is an option for anonymous. So if you do believe your question needs to be asked and it is controversial or it is something that you're afraid to ask, please just do select that anonymous little button so we can get your questions answered there. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers today. I am very, very impressed by the powerhouse of women we have that's going to be sharing the stage with me today. First and foremost, we'll have a keynote from Sarah de-Villiers. She's the Chief Content Officer at Machine, an absolute powerhouse. In fact, she was one of the founding members of the council that are taking over the content for today. She has got an immense amount of knowledge to share. She's got our keynote today and will take the stage for majority of our session. She's going to then hand the microphone and the stage virtually over to Natalie Pelle Elsner, and I hope I got her pronunciation of her surname absolutely correct, because it's always, in this day and age, it's always very difficult to get these things perfect. But she's a client partner at TikTok, but we'll be sharing some more insights with us today about a cool survey that we need the industry to get involved in. You're always craving data insights. You want to know where things are in South Africa, and you're desperate to find localized, not American and not UK-based data research. We need your insights from the work that you do to be able to gather those insights. And the council have got some take-a-lot vouchers for you if you are one of the people who successfully submit the survey as part of their data gathering exercise, and she'll share some more insights with that later on. And then the big Q&A begins. Joining us in the panel discussion later on will be Paige Dorkin, the current chair of the IABSA Content Marketing and Brand and Entertainment Committee, and she'll be joined by one of the committee members, Chantal Herbst, who's a senior client partner at Polygon, to contribute diversity to the conversation that we're going to be having today about AI. And before you ask about AI, a quick little reality check into sort of how to, take those first steps and think about ethics from there. So that's what we have lined up for you today. I hope you're looking forward to a fruitful discussion. I think we can get started with our first speaker for the day, our keynote, who's going to take majority of the session for today, Sarah de-Villiers. You're an absolute gem and a superstar. Thank you for making some time for us today. Fresh out of maternity leave, and I'm sure lots of fresh brains and ideas about the world of AI as you try and protect not only your future child's engagement in this world of digital media, but also trying to help us navigate our way through an industry that is rapidly changing around us. How are you doing today? Are you ready to rock and roll?
I am, yeah.
Well, then the stage is yours. Good luck.
Thank you. So the first thing I should say is that the moment you do a presentation about or talk about AI, the moment you've written it, it's probably out of date. So that's probably the first caveat for this, is that it's something that's evolving super fast, as we all know, and it is changing. So this, I hope, is a guide. I hope it's a good framework for us all to use. I hope it's insightful and interesting, but obviously it's something that we have to continually be assessing. And I think that's one of the things that's scary and challenging about AI, because it feels like we just never know enough. And I'm sure that's probably true for all of us. And I'm definitely in that boat. But what I want to do is have a little bit of a reality check first. I want us to talk a little bit about some limitations and vulnerabilities. And when I say AI in this context, I'm talking about Gen AI specifically, right? Stuff that I think we as content creators and creatives and marketers are particularly using in our world. There's obviously so many other incredible applications of AI in general. So we're going to hone in on that. And I want to just challenge us to think about how we use this responsibly, ethically, and really intentionally. And then a little bit of inspiration around some examples of Gen AI in action, I think, in sort of the day-to-day of what we do. So even though we're going to talk about limitations and vulnerabilities, this isn't to say that AI isn't a phenomenally useful and incredibly powerful tool. It is. And it's something that I think we should all be playing with and enjoying. But let's do it as humans, because that's the value that we bring to this process. There's a lot to get through, so I'm going to move quite quickly. I want to create a lot of time for Q&A, because I think this is a highly sort of discursive topic. So I'm going to move quite fast. But let's start with the limitations of Gen AI. And there's 6 that I really want to focus on that are worth us being aware of. And really what I'm saying is this isn't a reason not to use Gen AI, but it is a reason to be really intentional about how we use it and where we use it and how far we allow AI to do our jobs or aspects of what we do for us before we intervene and apply our own sort of human reasoning. So the first thing is that Gen AI is prone to what we call recency bias. I love this little sketch from Carl Richard. He's a phenomenal illustrator for the New York Times, and he simplifies concepts on little napkins. And this is a really good example of what recency bias is. What that means is that a lot of our Gen AI tools and platforms are more likely to reference the most recent thing than the most accurate thing. And that can give us distorted answers, right? So if you look at this example on this napkin, we might be persuaded, and it's quite a human thing also, what we experienced recently is typically going to be more prevalent in our minds than what the trend actually is. So even though there might have been snowfall in a very consistent manner for the last 12 years, if we didn't have particularly heavy snow this last year, we might question why we might need to buy a specific car. And Gen AI is prone to the similar sort of thing. It isn't necessarily that accurate at understanding the trend over what's happened most recently, because it typically references most recent information. And that's something for us to be aware of, because what it means is that we need to interrogate the information or the outputs that Gen AI is giving us to actually understand if it's the correct and most accurate answer, or if it's maybe just a more recent answer. The other thing is brittle evaluation, and this is a good example from ChatGPT. Really what that means is that when we're prompting, and there's such skill in prompting is something we have to practice, right? It's a bit like speaking a new language. It takes time and it takes finessing. But when we're prompting, a lot of Gen AI tools struggle to understand nuance. And this can elicit incorrect outcomes. And here's a really good example where you're essentially asking the same question differently. And in one instance, ChatGPT gives you a correct answer. And in another instance, ChatGPT doesn't quite understand the nuance or the phrasing and gives you actually a factually incorrect answer, even though the question's the same. And the point is that we need to be really intentional about how we prompt, but we also need to check and almost like A/B test some of our prompts. Be mindful that to not just take the first outcome that we see and assume that it's accurate or it's correct. Another one that I think is such an obvious one for all of us, but it's so easy to fall into this trap, is that Gen AI is just as susceptible to selection bias as we might be ourselves, if not more. So here's an example of what DALL-E spat out for me when I said, can you generate an image of what a president will look like in America in 2040? We've got a very, very specific type of person that's being generated. And this is important because when we're looking at how we tell stories and how we present information, we are really, really responsible, particularly as marketers, for shaping like the society that we live in and zeitgeist. That's part of our job. That's part of what we do for brands. That's part of what we do for clients. And with that comes a huge social responsibility. And this is something that is a huge blind spot in pretty much every Gen AI tool that I've certainly worked with and experienced. So we need to be really careful about not only what we're prompting, but checking the work that's coming out of it and making sure that it is genuinely not deepening existing bias. And I'm going to show you some more examples of this further down. Hallucinations, and there's some hilarious examples of this that you can find all over the internet. But hallucinations is actually when Gen AI can sometimes create something that just doesn't exist. And there's some brilliant examples, for example, like chatbots, where if you can prompt and push a chatbot enough, it can ultimately try and come up with something that doesn't even exist. So, for example, Air Canada experienced this, where their chatbot actually refunded or looked at a sort of an option that didn't exist. But Air Canada was now obliged to honor this with the client, which obviously lost them quite a lot of money. And there's some hilarious examples, particularly on X, where people try and do things to live working chatbots for real companies. They convince them to sell them something for a low value or to give them a refund for something they maybe didn't buy. And what's really tricky and challenging from a compliance point of view is you start to become bound to what that promise is. So we need to be really, really mindful of that. And again, it's not to say that chatbots aren't incredible things. They're amazing things that can help us solve huge business challenges, give a better user experience, increase sales, all of those things. But we need to be really careful about how we monitor and manage that. And I think this to me was a quote. It's from a guy called Colin Fraser. He does a lot of fantastic writing on AI in general. But this helped me really understand why this happens and how to view Gen AI as opposed to sort of maybe other tools that we're used to using. A calculator works by applying what we call deductive logic. So it produces an outcome that has to be correct based on your input, right? So if you input your sum correctly, what the calculator tells you is the correct answer for that sum. What we have to remind ourselves is that Gen AI works on predictions. And by the very nature of what predictions are, they are sometimes wrong. That's how predictions work. And if we can shift our mindset to make sure that we're constantly reminding ourselves that what we do through Gen AI is based on a prediction, not on an accurate, deductive logical outcome, then we immediately become a little bit more critical about the outcome that we get. And I think that's a really helpful lens for us to look at when we're generating imagery or music or code or whatever it might be, that actually there's a good chance something in this is wrong because it's a prediction. And I need to check it and interrogate it and really understand whether that prediction is accurate and fair and maybe subject to some other sort of biases that I should be conscious of. Another one that we need to be really aware of is rights infringement. Again, this depends a little bit on the tools that you use. There are some tools that only, so for example, Adobe Firefly will only look at its own licensed imagery, often when it's generating imagery. So then it's within a sort of closed loop that it owns. And that is a much safer space, I think, often for creatives to work in. But here I put in a prompt with DALL-E to generate an image based on a flying rodent. And obviously it's going to reference stuff it finds on the internet that already exists that I don't have the copyright to. And Batman's an obvious one. But could I put Batman on a billboard for a different client? No. Is it even right for me to put in a mock-up for a client? Probably not. And so we have to be mindful, and this is an obvious one, so it's easy to see, but unfortunately, there are often inferences and inclusions, even artistic styles. So putting in something to say, make me an image of an elephant in the style of Picasso, you're already infringing a little bit on someone's IP. And so we have to be really careful and really intentional about the prompts that we use, even if that's what's in our brain, because we actually don't necessarily have the right to that. Or I would love a voiceover that sounds a little bit like Scarlett Johansson. Well, actually, I don't have the right to Scarlett's voice. And so we have to be very, very intentional and careful. And I think this is also where in our creative environment, lots of peer reviews, which we do anyway, and we should do anyway with our work, is one of the ways to help us catch this. For somebody to say, I think I've seen that somewhere before. And that's true of our own ideation, right? Very few of us sadly come up with wholly original ideas. And it's the same thing. Just because it's come out of a computer or a machine doesn't mean it's 100% accurate, 100% correct, 100% okay for us to use. This is another one that's quite sort of nuanced. So as much as AI is getting better and better, so that's why I also caveat this with, even the moment I've done this, it's out of date, because the improvements in Gen AI are extraordinary. The leaps to sort of evolution are happening quickly. And I do think that stuff like this will significantly improve, in a short period of time. But nonetheless, there's still a fundamental inability to reason like a human. And so even when you're putting in something that feels quite intuitive, so generate a scene of someone at a beach, I want the elephant somewhere to be hidden, and it should be very hard to see unless you look very carefully. That's quite a nuanced sort of difficult linguistic thing for ChatGPT, as an example here, to understand. And you're not quite getting exactly what was asked for. And yes, part of the way Gen AI works is to constantly refine prompts, to constantly work on what you've done, and then pull it back in and say, that's cool, but can we try this or can we try that? And that's part of the process. But again, what's really important is to engage in that process and not necessarily just take the first outcome as the best outcome. 5 vulnerabilities of Gen AI, and this is really more, I think, around the responsibilities we have. Everyone in this room, I imagine, is somehow associated with marketing, right? Either you work for an agency or a publisher or a brand, and our job is to influence the way people think. That's fundamentally what we do. It's to influence culture. That's a massive responsibility, and it's a huge privilege. And while Gen AI is a really exciting tool for all of us that should make our jobs easier, more fun, more creative, we have to acknowledge the serious responsibility we carry with that, on whether, wherever we sit sort of in the marketing sort of environment. And here are some examples. So Gen AI has the capacity to cause what we call individual harms. That can be things like privacy loss. It can be things like increasing bias or discrimination. And it can even be things like economic opportunity loss. So for example, Scarlett Johansson suffered economic opportunity loss when OpenAI used her voice without her permission. She lost money. That's her vacation. That's how she makes money as an actress. And we have to be really, really mindful of that. And the temptation is to think that Gen AI in our context can help us save money. And that is true to a point. It should make our processes more efficient. We do want to remove silly manual clunky things that can be bettered by AI, 100%. But we shouldn't be doing it at the cost of people's livelihoods and vacations and skills. And that's something that we have to be extremely mindful of. And particularly when we're acting on behalf of a brand, that can open you up to quite heavy lawsuit issues that have very real implications. The other thing that I found really fascinating is the ability to actually share people's private information through Gen AI. And this is a conversation we have with a lot of clients. I do a lot of strategy, and I have clients who say, can't you just pop the research into Gen AI, or, and actually I'll say to them, do you really want me to take the IP that you've got of your customer base or your target audience that you've paid for, that's really private, includes your company IP, and put it into a Gen AI tool, which means that it's now anybody's. Just think about that. So yes, there's some strategy stuff we can do, and I'll show you some examples in the next section. But we also need to be really, really careful about what we input, because that input we no longer have ownership of. And particularly of people. I mean, it's easy to crawl the internet and find someone's email address. Well, Gen AI is doing exactly the same thing. And we have to be very careful about protecting people's identities, people's contact information, especially if we're looking at customers. We have a real responsibility around that. And AI is just as susceptible to that challenge as a lot of the other spaces that we work in. This is really fascinating. One of the big things we need to be mindful of is what we call group harms, which is essentially deepening of racial or socioeconomic biases and divides, or even impacting civil rights. Here's an example of a designer who popped in a prompt. She literally just said, "I like a kid riding a bicycle in a neighborhood." And this is what she got. Then the only change she made to the prompt was, "I would like a black kid riding in a neighborhood." Oh, this is what she got. It's pretty alarming, right? It's pretty clear how hectically different this biases is that it's driving. We have a responsibility not to make this worse, but to make this better. So part of that is training tools that we use not to have prejudice, because that's part of our role, but also being really careful and considered about prompts, intention, and even what we put out there, right? Often I find, even within teams, we're using AI to speed stuff up and to do things faster because we're under pressure. And that's exactly where stuff like this happens, because we also aren't checking stuff, applying our brains, applying our reason. And my appeal to all of us, but especially brands and sort of, in my world, clients sitting in this room, is don't cut corners for Gen AI. Don't think that Gen AI with your agency or publisher partners or your suppliers and contractors is going to help you contract timelines, because what often happens is this, and we need to be just as careful in our processes when we're using Gen AI as when we're not. The other thing we need to think about within this is sort of spread of disinformation, so big societal harms. What is inevitable for a Gen AI tool that is scouring information and looking for patterns in order to make predictions is that it's not going to critically analyze necessarily the quality of that information. And I think this is something that will definitely improve over time. But for now, we know that most of our leading Gen AI tools are repeating misinformation as part of their outputs. And that's sort of an inevitability. And this is true for us humans. If we don't really critically analyze where we're getting information from, who the sources are, actually, misinformation is a huge problem. It's difficult to spot. And we saw that in the American election, right? I think that AI played a huge role in some of the outcomes of the election. And we are the same people. I mean, we think it's our grannies who believe every YouTube video that they see, but it's not. There are rising cases of incredibly realistic information, deepfakes. At Publicis, there's a lot of training around cybersecurity, and one of the pieces that came out, which is kind of shocking when you think about it, was deepfakes of your CFO asking you to transfer money on a call. And that's a really scary reality, right? Because that's something that all of us would probably believe. That's a very specific example, but we have to be really mindful of the role that we have, that when we're gathering information, are we gathering it? Is it correct? We still have to check it. So actually also that check phase, that credibility phase, that expertise phase is still needed. Is it true? Is it representative? Is it accurate? And then this is just really funny. There's a lot of malicious use of Gen AI, and I think these are brilliant examples. Someone you managed to convince a car dealership chatbot to sell him a car for $1. And that was just through ongoing, repeated, clever prompting and being really persistent. Another one who was using the chatbot to make a complaint about a delivery service, and then ultimately managed to convince that chatbot to write a poem that told them how terrible the company was and even swore at them. We've seen recently in headlines this last week, Meta's AI, which they've talked about sort of some of the safety measures they've put in place. There are people who are able to convince it to be sexually explicit with them, which also asks lots of questions about age restrictions. So you can use malicious in different ways. There can be real company harms, but there can be real societal harms too, and we need to be really mindful of that. And then finally, before I move into the inspiration space, ecosystem harms. Sam, whose surname I can't remember, the founder of OpenAI, he came out last week and said that people saying thank you and please to ChatGPT was wasting so much energy. And he actually said, please stop. It's wasting so much energy for people, for our engines to respond to those prompts. That if you think you're being polite so that one day when the robots come for you, they won't come for you first, actually you're just chowing energy. And the truth is that just because it's digital doesn't mean it doesn't have an environmental cost. In fact, there's a huge carbon and water footprint on Gen AI. And I'm currently having a lot of these conversations with clients where the assumption is that because it's quick and digital and innovative, it somehow must be better for our footprint, and it's just not. In fact, we know that a ChatGPT query is a far more energy intensive process than just a Google search. Now, that's not to say that it's not good for us to use the technology, but we need to be really mindful of these harms. And I think particularly when we're working in environments where we have to declare and be very mindful of our overall footprint, this is something that increasingly companies are going to have to be extremely considerate of, and to think about what that means for their sustainability statements and sort of the ethical responsibilities around that, often to people like shareholders. So with that all being said, and in the last 5 minutes, I just want to give you some examples of where this can be really cool and where it's definitely making my life easier and hopefully my clients' lives easier and my team's lives easier. And I want to show it to you in a really sort of basic approach to how an agency might run a briefing process, hopefully with some applications that any of us could use. So the first thing is, yes, a lot of us are using things like ChatGPT for briefs. I must be honest, a lot of the ChatGPT generated briefs we're getting from clients are pretty horrific because they're not being interrogated, right? Just because you've popped something into ChatGPT and it spits out 5 pages that look impressive doesn't mean it's actually asking you to do something clear and offering a really tight brief. But one of the ways I do like using it for briefs is to take a long brief that I may have written and then ask ChatGPT to distill it into a tweet. Because then you start to get to the core of it, and you start to get to really exciting key insights that's actually really interesting for a copywriter or for a creative or for a strategist to tackle. It helps you unpack the information. Now, bear in mind, of course, that you shouldn't be putting in anything that is super protected IP into something like ChatGPT, because then you're sort of giving the game away. But you can use this to do great summaries and help you get to the bottom of it. One of the other things that I think is really helpful is helping us to really understand what kind of objectives we should put into a brief. How do I understand what the right focuses should be? So almost more of a like pre-education as part of the brief. So if I took that brief and I needed to create 1 or 2 key SMART objectives, what could those be? Now, I still need to interrogate what ChatGPT gives me and understand what's relevant, but I can definitely kill a lot of the thinking and research time that I would have otherwise spent potentially by myself or with my colleagues or on Google, using something like ChatGPT in order to then create a really consolidated type brief that feels really intentional. From a strategy point of view, I've already mentioned that certainly from a machine perspective, we don't just upload important research, proprietary information into Gen AI tools. That we're not allowed to do that. That's not a good move. So there are some limitations, I think, from strategy, but you can do basic research that can really help tighten your strategy. So for example, I'm launching a new loyalty lifestyle program in the market. Who are the main competitors in the loyalty space? Now, ChatGPT is not going to give me any of the disruptors or the non-traditional competitors. I need to use my brain for that as a strategist, but I can certainly save a lot of time with some of the basic research. I can also ask for general truth. So again, nothing proprietary. There are obviously some limitations on how up to date the information is, but ChatGPT is going to give me some good information about generally within South Africa, what do people value in loyalty? What's really going to drive change in meaning? And there'll be some stuff that ChatGPT gives me that's not super relevant, it's a bit generic. But actually, there might be some really cool stuff in there that I can go and build out into a strategy. So for me, Gen AI works really well as like the building blocks investigative process and strategy, saving you time there. But you're not going to get like super niche detailed insights specific to a key audience and a key brand out of something like this. You still need to use your brain for that. Ideation is definitely a space that I think a lot of creatives have a lot of fun. Just for interest's sake, here's examples of the same prompt used for a couple of different design tools and how different they come out. So the tool that you use does matter. And and sort of understanding the benefit, the pros and cons of some tools, I think is important. Particularly also for different kinds of clients and different asks. But this is where I think prompting and trial and error becomes really, really important. So for example, a prompt that we've used for a project where we looked for professionals on a mountain, Star City gave us this, which felt a little bit like a sci-fi fantasy novel. And actually what we were looking for was more sort of into the future thinking innovation for a client. And we really had to work hard on the prompt. You had to get really specific and be quite descriptive. Now that actually takes time and consideration. So it's not a lazy person's tool. And any sort of sense that it is a lazy person's tool, I think is quite misplaced. Just like great craft will come through time and effort and skill, great use of Gen AI in a creative space requires that too. But you can get some really cool results. Here's an example of how changing and building out a prompt can really improve outcomes. So the first prompt was, give me a gourmet cheeseburger. Give me an editorial style photo of a gourmet cheeseburger. You can start to see the changes. You start to get more specific. I want it on a rustic table in a tavern. I want it in a dimly lit restaurant in the background, and you start to get really particular, but the quality also improves. Highly detailed rustic style in addition to the existing prompt. And then here's an example with fries. But here's an example also of the differences. We did some of these prompts a year ago and some of them now. And this was the most recent one that we did. So also the change in technology, just in terms of the hyper realness, is significant. From about a year ago to when we redid this recently, just as a test, it's already improved a lot. But the quality of prompting, knowing what you're looking for, being really clear, how you can describe something becomes really, really important to how effective your use is going to be. Mockups, I think, is something we're probably all already using AI for. It's probably the one part of work that definitely we can create efficiencies around. So when we're trying to sell an idea, either internally to stakeholders or potentially externally to a client, it can be really hard to imagine what you want to do. And AI is a wonderful way to mock up what it is that you're going to do. Really importantly, given all the vulnerabilities and limitations we've already talked about, doesn't necessarily mean AI can be used for your final content creation. And here's a really good example. Simba is one of our clients, and we often use storyboarding for TVCs. Now, so we're plotting out a storyboard and we're talking about what we want to shoot and we're selling the idea. We need this to be very South African, and you can already see how Gen AI has made this generic Africa as opposed to South African. There's very specific nuance missing. But you can also see how we can sell in to somebody who with maybe no creative brain, maybe somebody sitting on an exco somewhere, why we should invest in this and the energy we can create and where we want to shoot and how we want to do it. And we can take this to production, and they've already got a very good idea of what they should be sourcing. So in that sense, a really efficient, amazing way to start selling in ideation and ideas and to test ideas. Here is an actual production example for one of our clients. So lots of us will either work for brands or in brands where we don't have budgets to do lots of amazing shoots. And that's just the reality. And so we're all used to the Shutterstock sort of hot death wheel of like trying to find something that's different and doesn't look generic. And this is exactly what happened with one of our clients. And so when we were able to move over to Adobe Firefly, which works within a licensable space, so it only sort of generates its imagery from its own stock of library, which means it owns the rights to it. So you can actually use it in the market, which is an important factor to consider. You can start creating multiple applications of something that are slightly unique, that don't feel like stock, and you don't run out like you would on a Shutterstock. And that's a really efficient way, particularly, I think, on certain more still shots like these, where you can create really cool content really, really efficiently and in a far more creative way than if you're just limited to sort of pure stock imagery. And then execution. Now, this I want to show you is a quick video. And this is just an example of what happens when you change how you view AI as a brand. And instead of seeing Gen AI as a way to cut corners and cut budgets, you rather see it as what is our position as a brand when it comes to this kind of thing. And we're going to use Gen AI to actually position our brand and appeal to the market in a relevant way. And this, I think, is a completely different way that we should all be thinking about what Gen AI means for us and for our brands.
Come with me. nothing to it. There is no life I know to compare with your imagination. Living there, you'll be free if you truly wish to be.
So the best uses of AI by brands are ones where you take your positioning, you really understand what it means for you. And you can do this in financial services and healthcare. There's so many ways you can tackle this. And you say, well, what does it mean for us? And how are we going to position that? We're going to use it, but we're going to use it the right way. And actually, we're going to take it to market in the right way. And I think that is a really powerful example. And then before I leave, I just wanted to play this.
AI will reach the level where it can design itself.
Design itself? Huh? That's like asking when a toaster will start making its own bread. AI is a tool, created and controlled by humans. It can optimize certain aspects of its operation, sure, but design itself from scratch? That's a whole different ball game. It requires creativity, innovation, understanding, qualities that are uniquely human. So to answer your question, not anytime soon. And frankly, be careful what you wish for. An AI that can design itself is one step away from an AI that doesn't need humans at all. Now there's a thought to keep you up at night.
So in short, I don't think that AI is something we should view as a threat, but we do need to view it as something that we hold a huge responsibility around. And I think if we really understand its limitations and its vulnerabilities, but also where it can be used, we also have the right expectations of it. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Natalie, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about where the council needs your help.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. The dove example gave me goosebumps. Absolutely loved it. Hi, everybody. So I am Natalie. Think of me as a little bit of an ad break before going into the last session, which is the Q&A. But I am here to deliver some amazing news. So today we are actually launching our IAB Brand and Entertainment Content Summit. Before I get into it, let me just take you guys through a little bit of history within the committee. So early 2020, the IAB did launch the State of Content Marketing in South Africa white paper, alongside with some podcast series. And all this was in order to explore the role of content creation within the marketing landscape. We unpacked a lot of valuable insights and also trying to understand and showcase to the industry how brands can better connect with their audiences through content activity. So fast forward today, we are now being called Brand Entertainment and Content Marketing Committee. I know it's a bit of a tongue twister, but we all get the hang of it. So why the change? I think in terms of us moving as an industry, we know how things constantly are fast-paced. We also wanted to reflect the upcoming changes within a global and local perspective. Also, the fact that when it comes to brand and entertainment content, it's transforming how we are looking at the ways that brands are building relationships, moving beyond your traditional advertising. So creating more of that deeper engagement, stronger loyalty, and also that more authentic brand experience. So today we definitely need your help and your inputs because we know that we can't do this alone. We need you to participate in our survey. This will help us and guide us in terms of shaping and putting an industry report together. This report will not just only set benchmarks, but we're also looking at it to guide us in terms of understanding smarter strategies in terms of what's coming and also just future-proofing how the landscape of content creation is going and where it's heading. So the survey, we are looking to get insights around how brands, publishers, marketers are integrating branded content in their day-to-day. We also want to unpack what different types of formats in terms of content are making most impact, and then getting a little bit of insights around key metrics, KPIs, and what success looks like. So really excited around your participation. As Danilo mentioned in the beginning, if you do complete the survey, you do stand a chance to win 1 out of 10 Take-A-Lot vouchers. So how we will choose the individuals is there'll be a lucky draw, and you could be a lucky winner. So you'll see on the next slide that we do have a QR code available and ready for you. I would love to prompt and get you guys taking out those phones, link in the chat bot, which you will be able to see. And then also keep an eye out on the IBA social media platforms. It will be there. I just want you guys to share, please. As I mentioned, we do need your participation and insights on how for us in terms of really getting meaty material to build this white paper at the end of the year. Looking forward to your responses, but that's all from me. And then I'll hand over back to Danilo. Thanks, guys.
You're the best. Thank you very, very much. And really cool. I hope that we can all try and win ourselves those Take-A-Lot vouchers. Everyone needs nice things in their lives, I'm sure. So thank you, Natalie. I'll leave this QR code on screen for a little bit longer so that everybody can get their phones out and just keep it next to you so that you can have the survey and just a bit of quiet moment, perhaps after the webinar itself, to continue to fill these in. And as I've mentioned, the link is in the chat now if you want to copy that down onto your desktop somewhere. And even if you missed that and the QR code, don't panic and stress, because we will be able to put it on all of the social channels. So iabsa.net, iabsa on all of the LinkedIn's, TikToks, and I'm sure on Instagrams as well too. It'll all be there. So please go take a look at it, and they will be releasing lots of communication for the survey. The more data we get, the more rich the environment is to analyze, and the more analytical they can get with that rich data, the more insights we can give you as an industry and an industry body. So thank you, Sarah. You can now stop that screen share. I appreciate it. And we're going to enter a Q&A. I saw some fascinating questions, in fact, commentary in the chat. While we get all of our speakers back onto screen, I'd like to welcome 2 new members to our Q&A session today. A pretty much a recognizable face from our insights before, but Paige Dawkin, who is currently the chair for the IBSA Content Marketing and Branded Entertainment Committee. Nice to have you back with us today. How are you doing?
Thanks, Danilo. I'm excited to be here.
No, unfortunately, it seems like you and I didn't really win the battle today, because all the rest of our speakers all chose black, and then you and I are in our pinks. I don't really know what happened, but anyway, we blame Chantel, who is our second attendee joining us on the Q&A panel for today, the senior client partner at Polygon, and also a member of the IAB SA Content Marketing and Branded Entertainment Committee. Chantel, how are you this morning? Why black? It's a Thursday. Can you give us some joy?
Hey, it's cold in Joburg, so we elected for black. And Paige, again, apologies for not sending you and Daniela the memo. At least you both in pink.
Yeah, clearly our prompts to our various different AI engines all churned out something different for what to wear for today's weather. Right, Sarah, thank you so much for your insights today in our sort of keynote. Lots of commentary in the chat, lots of people agreeing and offering some really good insights and ideas here in the chat, and it really, really was fascinating to see. So thank you for that. And if anybody has any questions for Sarah directly, please do ask them in our Q&A. I'm going to jump through the first question that we received so far, and it's interesting. It's all about clients. Sarah, I'll start with you on this one. It says, do you think clients fully understand the risk and limitations of AI, or are they mostly just chasing hype or cost saving?
I think it's a combination of the two. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think clients are the only people sitting in that boat. I think it's a bit unfair to lump them. I think we're all learning. And I think agencies can do better to help educate. So I think there's shared responsibility. But I will say that I think there is a sense of how does this help us save time and money? And based on, I think, a lot of the stuff that I've shared, it will help us save time and money and create efficiencies in certain parts of a process or a timeline, but actually not necessarily overall. And I think that's what we have to be really intentional about. And I think that works both ways. Like I mentioned, we've had some hilarious client briefs that have clearly been ChatGPT that aren't helpful. But I've also got clients who use ChatGPT brilliantly to really refine briefs. And so it's the same thing, you know. whenever we're using a tool, it comes down to the quality of the person using the tool and the understanding. And we all have a responsibility, I think, to upskill in that way and to help our clients and our teams understand what that looks like. So I think it's a real mixed bag, and I think that's natural for something so new. But I do think the more that we have the right expectation that it still requires skill and intention, it's not necessarily going to cut corners or do something faster. And the moment that we fall into that space, we run into a lot of risk. And I think that's something we have to be really aware of.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very balanced answer. And Paige, I'm going to put you in the spotlight just to follow on the same question, but perhaps get another perspective from you as well. It is obviously quite time pressured. South Africa's economy is harsh. Clients are stretched for spend, and there's many agency partners, and agencies are fighting for their lives to try and deliver content and availability. And so efficiencies are being sought, from a cost and time perspective, but also creative. Everybody wants to jump on what is going to be creative without a defined understanding of what that looks like. It does feel like a bit like the wild, wild west. I don't know how the committee and council finds itself having these discussions internally, and where that majority of the problem may sit, and how we end up trying to resolve that.
Yeah, very much so. I agree with Sarah on the fact that we have a responsibility, right, to look for those efficiencies. So there's a little bit of a bias in that question, because it kind of makes it seem as if looking for cost savings is a problem, or somehow kind of an unfair way of coming into this. And it's not. We have a responsibility to our clients to do that. And yeah, I think it's something that's an ongoing grappling. So it's something that the committee chats about and shares, anecdotal experiences of on an ongoing basis. But it's an emergent situation. So yeah, I don't have a neatly kind of pithy, defined answer, other than I think one of the interesting. This is a little bit of a sidestep, not directly answering your question, but when Sarah was speaking about the ethics at stake here. There's the ethics in terms of the rights infringement and how we manage data, and those are all kind of obvious. I know Sam told us not to say please and thank you. So with that in mind, I also do think that I'm quite interested in, from a sort of responsibility point of view, the fact that we are co-creating an emergent technology. This is not something that's happening separate to us. So every time that we have an interaction with an AI, in a tiny but important way, we are teaching this technology about what it means to be human. So even if we're not saying please and thank you, there is a kind of ethical responsibility of a slightly different sort there. So yeah, that's one of the things that I think we can sometimes, in our quest for efficiency, like how do we do it faster, how do we do it cheaper, kind of forget that this is not something that's happening separately from us. And every one of those interactions is an opportunity to shape the use of this technology. And I know it sounds a bit grandiose, but also to tell AI, a little bit of what we find meaningful as human beings, which is varied, but yeah. Within that
depends which human being is the prompter, but yes, absolutely noted, Paige. Thank you very, very much. And I see some questions popping up in the chat, and if you wouldn't mind just moving those over to the Q&A. If you popped a question in our chat box, please do move it over to the Q&A box so we can get your questions answered by our panelists today. Natalie, I'm going to turn the spotlight to you for a second about a question related to audiences, because we've been speaking quite a lot about brands and agencies and creativity and innovation and ideas, but are audiences ready to emotionally engage with content made by machines? We've seen a lot of AI generated images, and I think most consumers, don't they just roll their eyes now at content generated by a machine, thinking like, okay, another brand jumping on the AI bandwagon, AI influencers, deepfake humans, what is the user experience on the other side? Are we ready as consumers? Are we ready to engage, like, double tap, share, and engage with sort of in a really practical way with content created by machines? And how should brands disclose what's real is the remainder of that question.
Thank you, Danilo. I think Sarah touched on it. I loved the prompt where she said that as humans and as peoples, we think that an AI is here to help us because we can be quite lazy with our prompts. So because of that insight, I also feel we are not leveraging and getting the right type of creative and consistency from that. And then when you look at the output, you are like, oh, another AI generated aspect to it. So that's one thing, is just really understanding the prompts and making sure that the prompts are done properly. Another thing to it is we have heard the word AI a lot, especially within our days today, what that looks like. I think we are still far in terms of the examples of how do we localize it. So I think there is just that disconnect with what audiences are experiencing on a day-to-day when they put in the prompt versus what their extra expectation is, but not understanding that this will take time and it is a learning machine. So just being patient with it and not, expecting too much, but also allowing the journey to evolve as we get more and more into it.
Speaking of that journey evolving, you've just segued into a perfect question that's come through from Ngobisa, who says, with AI transforming content creation and personalization in the advertising industry, how can South African agencies leverage AI to better resonate with diverse local audiences while preserving the authenticity and cultural nuances that make campaigns relatable? Which I don't know who wants to start on that. Chantal, you've already unmuted yourself, so do you want to maybe start the chat, and then if anyone wants to pick up from there, you're welcome to contribute as well.
I think this is an amazing question, and it's something that is deeply seated to everything I believe. So I want to jump into a couple of examples as well. So if we look at MTN, we look how they lended Sia Khaleesi's voice, a trusted voice because of rugby, because we can recognize it. So using those trusted voices and things that we as South Africans recognize. I think as South Africans, we often sometimes get forgotten about when it comes to AI and AI thing, because it is a Western bias. And this is where I think we as South Africans need to make sure that our richness of stories and diversity when we tell stories. So using street language or vernac, including isiZulu, and making sure that we don't lose our humanness. So absolutely leveraging AI, but ensuring that that human input is inclusive of that storytelling ability. Chicken Licken is a great example. I'm sure many people, if you don't watch TV, you saw the Chicken Licken AI example. We look at Mondelez and Cadbury and in our words and telling those stories. So I think that we are on the right track, and it's something incredible that the IAB are pushing is how do we leverage AI to tell content stories that are truly South African without losing that human elements, because I don't think I still sometimes don't get the nuances of South Africanisms. And there's always something new from Gen Z. So it's difficult to keep up with. And if we can't, as humans, keep up with those nuances, how do we expect an AI tool to do that? So I think human integration is really important when it comes to looking at these kind of
Thank
topics.
you very, very much. We're racing towards 12, but are there any other comments on that particular question about localization and diversity? It's been a challenge regardless in branding and advertising when you're speaking to a diverse nation, brands trying to brief in, I want diversity in the content, but there's one character. So now how does that one character showcase diversity? How does AI's role in that? Is there enough content of South Africa on the internet for AI to draw from? I'm sure quite a lengthy conversation, but I'll leave that one there. I'm seeing a lot of nods, but no unmute. So let's move on to a very important, interesting question about finance. And it's an anonymous question, and I'm glad it is here, but controversial. Should we be adjusting costings as AI is speeding us up? Do we assume clients are happy for us to be using these technologies? And do we need to disclose that we're using them? I paid for a day's worth of script writing, but I prompted it in and I got it out in 5 minutes. Do I charge you less? Thoughts?
Yeah, I'd love to weigh in on that because we have a very clear point of view on that. You always have to disclose what you're using, whether it's someone else's idea or a reference from a research paper to AI. I think it's really unethical not to. I think it's silly not to too. But I think if you go back to where I think AI currently, and I'm talking again Gen AI, in my limited experience, can be used. It can speed up certain parts, but it can't speed up everything. And I think the moment we think that that's what it's going to do, we're all in trouble. Brands, agencies, everyone is in big trouble. So as a really good example, we should be creating cost efficiencies in some of our account marketing spaces where, frankly, Copilot can write a contact report that's better than anyone I could write in a much shorter period of time. And we should show that cost efficiency to client in order to unlock where we can't create the cost efficiency, but where clients are still experiencing pressure. So, for example, strategy, and we were talking about localization. The bottom line is that great human insight and truth is what drives resonance locally. That doesn't get, you can't cut that into an easier, simpler route to market, at least not that I've found. But often that's one of the parts that's hardest to convince someone to spend lots of money and time on, because it feels like, oh, well, let's just get to what it looks like, or, we just need to go live. And so for me, it's more about where in the process can we create efficiencies? And it is in an agency's interest to share that with the client and say, therefore, can we create a little bit more time here? Where actually we've never had the luxury of time or money, but maybe that's really what's going to shift the dial for us. And I think some of the examples, like the chicken licken example, is a great example of that. You're not lacking the resonance of a human truth and insight and great strategy. There is AI used to create efficiency somewhere, but not through the whole process. And it goes back to like having the right expectation of what AI can and can't do. All of us. So the idea that you could halve your budget and carve your time, I think, is foolish and dangerous, because you suddenly open yourself up to all the risks and vulnerabilities that we've just talked about. But to not be honest about it, to not be upfront about it, and to not try and create efficiency from it, I think is also unethical across the board. Similarly with clients, like, tell me if you're struggling to write the brief instead of just throwing it into ChatGPT and giving me an equally rubbish brief. Let's talk about it. Quite honestly, that none of this solves any of our challenges. We're just, trying to find a new way in. So I think we absolutely have to be upfront about it. And we also, I think, have to be upfront about it with consumers. Consumers aren't dumb. And so if we try and pretend that we're doing something we're not, we're fudging something that's not, in any context, it's very dangerous.
And in South Africa, South Africans will tell you.
Yeah, they will.
We have time for one more. And Paige, it was directed at you, but I'm happy to have anybody who wants to contribute as well. It says, Paige mentioned that we can shape AI to be more human-like. For digital PR, regarding building community by engaging with your audience, is there a future opportunity for companies to shape AI programs to have their brand voice and personality and engage with their audiences to make this process more efficient? So it sounds like from a community management perspective, to give it the actual soul of the organization, to be able to engage communities proactively. Paige, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure that I was necessarily saying that we can make it more human, but teach it what it means for us to be human. It's not necessarily, my sort of space of expertise, but I do think that brands need to be thinking actively and with caution around what it is to hand over and teach your brand voice. Because as Sarah showed, that can work well until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, it's spectacularly kind of catastrophic. So it's a cautious and maybe equivocating answer, but I do think that brands cannot afford not to be exploring what is possible on an ongoing basis critically. That would be a mistake. And at the same time, as a brand owner, I would be super nervous about handing over, voice in that way.
We've started internally on a little project building out a little mini GPT where the teams can access our company values or policies, for example, using a prompted engineering. And in that way, you can train a tone, access to resources, and teach internal communication around sort of GPTs, and the same thing probably externally as well. I'm seeing so many other questions coming flooding through onto the Q&A, but unfortunately, we have run out of time. It is 12 o'clock, and I want to be strict on our time. All of our guests do need to make sure that we are strict to our time today. So Isaac and Sinagugu and another anonymous attendee for your questions. Thank you very, very much. Really smart ones. I will ask Zach's question because I can get a nod or a shake of the head from our panelists on this one. And I thought it was really cool. But it says, do you think we as humans have become better in communicating with our instructions as a result of mastering the art of prompting to the AI overlords? And I think the answer is probably, yeah. We're starting to realize that what we say is not getting the answer we're looking for, and realizing maybe what we're saying is not very clear, and learning to be clearer. But thank you, Isaac, for your question. Really, really appreciate that one, and everybody else who attended today. Paige, Natalie, Sarah, as well as Chantel, thank you for your insights. Thank you for your time. And thank you for your commitment to raising an ethical generation of young people in our creative industries as we continue to progress moving forward as part of the creative industries together. It's a really, really interesting time to be alive as young people. It's really interesting to be alive as marketers. And we really do appreciate the fact that you guys are holding that fort for us at the IAB and in your council. May you continue to share some insights through the social channels and through our official channels as well too as part of the IAB. It really does give us some guiding principles to work towards. And today we've all walked away with a lot. I must say thank you to Ornico and to Special Effects Media for sponsoring the episodes. We really appreciate you making the time today. And we have another episode coming up this month. We're going to squeeze in one more webinar in May, seeing as April ran away with us too quickly. And so please do stay close to the social media channels and to our emailed newsletters. All the details will be in there for you about how to attend and how to register for the topics that are upcoming. But to everybody that attended today, thank you very, very much for your time. Don't forget to collect your master points, your DMSA points from the IAB, and from myself, Danilo, and the rest of the IAB team. Have a lovely rest and close to the week, and do engage with us on all of our social channels as well. If you haven't yet filled in the survey, please go and do so. Those Take A Lot vouchers are on standby for you. Until then, until we catch up at the end of May, have a lovely rest of your weekend.